In 2010, WWE signed one of the best young wrestling prospects in the entire world, Tyler Black. Tyler Black had toured the world and won championships in Ring of Honor and many other promotions. During this time, he fought some of the best wrestlers in the world, including Daniel Bryan, AJ Styles, and Kevin Owens. Truly, he was a talent to keep your eyes on. When he was in his teenage years, people like AJ Styles simply said that he was the future of the business. In 2010, WWE decided to bolster up their developmental system with the signing of Tyler Black. Tyler Black was no more and Seth Rollins had arrived in FCW. Quickly, Rollins became one of the most exciting talents to watch in FCW. He had amazing matches with guys like Dean Ambrose, and he eventually became the FCW champion, and he would be one of the last FCW champions. FCW was gone and it was time for a new show. We'd seen the crappy reality game show NXT, but now WWE had big plans for it. This was going to be the new developmental system for them, and Seth Rollins, alongside everyone else on the FCW roster, was part of the brand new NXT. When you have a new promotion, you need a new top dog, and Seth Rollins became the top dog on NXT. He beat Jinder Mahal in the finals of a tournament that would see him become the first ever NXT champion. Tyler Black, Gix, Seth Rollins, Colby Lopez, whatever you want to call him, will always have that achievement of being the first ever NXT champion. We all knew how talented and exciting he was, but it wouldn't be long before we saw Seth Rollins arrive onto the scene in WWE. In the legendary debut at the 2012 Survivor Series, the trio of Rollins, Ambrose, and Reigns put WWE on notice. A triple powerbomb to Ryback through the announce table, and the Shield was born. So many questions to who this group was, but quickly they became one of the best acts in the company. Since they helped CM Punk retain his WWE Championship, the storyline became that these guys were hired by CM Punk to do his dirty work. But they transitioned out of that pretty quickly. The way these three competed was described as a pack mentality. They'd ruthlessly beat down anyone and everyone they saw fit, and quickly their stock was rising. They didn't lose a match for about 7 months into their tenure. They were fun to watch, and they had this wild and unpredictability about them. A matter of months after Rollins made his debut with the Shield, the team of himself and Roman Reigns won the Tag Team Championships at Extreme Rules 2013. On the other hand, Dean Ambrose had also captured the United States Championship. These guys were at the top. These guys were dominant, and they were the perfect example of how a group should be portrayed. Badass, strong, didn't give a damn about what anyone had to say, they just simply wanted to win. Eventually, they lost the titles on an episode of Raw to the Rhodes Brothers, but it was a dominant and refreshing reign. At the same time, the Authority was on a mission to make Daniel Bryan's life a living hell at any cost, so the Shield turned into the backup for Randy Orton and Triple H. Eventually, when that played its course, it was time for the group to turn babyface, because we just loved this group, man. We had Roman Reigns, who was naturally cool and the powerhouse, Dean Ambrose was whack out of his mind, and Seth Rollins was the high-flying member of the group that you just loved to watch in the ring. They had us all hooked. They turned on the Authority, and it was time for the past to meet the present. It was during this time that the Shield had legendary matches with Evolution. These matches were amazing, and honestly, you need to watch them if you haven't. They were a beautiful car crash with so much action and things going on all over the place. The Shield took the win in both 3-on-3 matches. They were on top of the world. They had beaten one of the greatest groups of all time until a chair shot to the back of Roman Reigns ended everything. Seth Rollins was no longer in it for the team. He was Plan B, and he was with the Authority. And here is where the ascent into superstardom begun. He aligned himself with Triple H, Randy Orton, and Kane. He had new backup. He was the chosen one by Triple H himself. But this dude, Dean Ambrose, like a crazed girlfriend, just wouldn't let go of him. Rollins broke the brotherhood, and Ambrose was coming for him. It was during this time that Seth Rollins became Mr. Money in the Bank. at a time where Money in the Bank actually meant something and worked wonders for up-and-coming stars. Rollins was one of them. While holding on to the Money in the Bank, he was in a feud with Dean Ambrose through the summer and early fall. The simple premise was Ambrose couldn't get over what Seth did, and now he was out to make his life a living hell. They had amazing matches at SummerSlam and Hell in a Cell, and throughout all of this, the one constant was Seth actually felt like a viable threat. They made the briefcase feel like it could be cashed in at any time. He was scheming, he was evil. Dare I say, he was close to Edge. He felt like the dude you had to hate. Once Ambrose was out of the way, it was time for him to lead Team Authority at Survivor Series. If Team Authority lost, Seth Rollins' protection was gone, that being Triple H and Stephanie. They would be out of power, and that is exactly what happened. Rollins made the final against Dolph Ziggler, and WWE here did a great job at presenting Rollins as a star. They showed he could hold his own in the ring, and the threat of the Money in the Bank was still right there. Then he moved on to a feud with Cena and Lesnar while still having the Money in the Bank. Seth Rollins would be contending for the top prize in sports entertainment, and now there were two threats. Seth could win the match and still have the briefcase, or he could just let the match play out and capitalize on the winner. This match was tremendous, everything about it, the pace, the competitors, Brock Lesnar turning into a freak, but at the end of the night, it was Seth Rollins' shoulders who were pinned to the mat. Elsewhere in the same pay-per-view, it was his former running mate in the Shield winning the Royal Rumble, which everyone hated. They didn't want Roman anywhere near the World Championship. His whole presentation, the way they were forced to like him, and his nuclear push to the top wasn't sitting well with WWE fans. But nonetheless, he was the Royal Rumble winner and he'd meet Brock Lesnar at the upcoming WrestleMania 31. At the same pay-per-view, it was going to be Seth Rollins versus Randy Orton, the two members of the Authority now at crossed paths wanting to rip each other's head off. Mr. Money in the Bank versus the Apex Predator. Randy Orton hit one of the best RKOs ever and put the first blemish on Seth Rollins' WrestleMania record. But that wasn't it for him. In the main event, Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns had torn strips off one another. They were bloody, they were tired, but little did the crowd know that it would be none of these men walking out as the WWE Champion. Just when both men were down, the second coming hit. Seth Rollins comes out, cashes in his Money in the Bank, and it's now a triple threat match. And in the most poetic way, he pins the man who he stabbed in the back with a chair just months ago. Seth Rollins had pulled off the heist of the century, and now he was the WWE Champion. Everything had come full circle. A star had been made, and whether intentional or not, the way he did it was amazing. First, he got rid of Ambrose. Then he proved he could contend with the top stars in WWE. Then he pinned the man who he stabbed in the back with a chair, and everything came full circle. From here, Seth Rollins did everything perfectly. Once again, he was the PG version of Edge in my opinion, using others to capitalize when the moments are right, sneaking wins in the dumbest of ways. You couldn't help but hate the dude, but appreciate him at the same time. He had amazing matches with guys like Randy Orton and Brock Lesnar, and at SummerSlam 2015, he beat the top dog in the business, John Cena. He took his US title and now he was both the WWE and United States champion. Eventually he lost the title back to Cena, but his stock was just rising higher and higher. He was in high profile matches, he was working 2 matches in one night, he was simply on the run of his career before it was all cut short. At a live event in Ireland, Rollins landed on the instep of his left knee and it buckled under him. It was announced the WWE title had to be vacated and that he would need immediate surgery. The timeline was there, but it was a brutal end for such a well put together rise. His vacated title was won by who else than Roman Reigns. I mean, who else could it be? During this time, Rollins was gone and WWE tried to recreate Daniel Bryan's underdog versus the world story with Roman Reigns, but it didn't work. Eventually, Reigns regained and lost the title a few times before finally overcoming the odds. It was May of 2016 and Reigns had just finished a match with AJ Styles at Extreme Rules. Outran Seth Rollins to hit a pedigree and signify he was back and he was here to reclaim what he never lost. And now, perfectly enough, it was Seth Rollins versus Roman Reigns at Money in the Bank. Forever, these two are linked, but it always seemed to be Rollins who would come out on top, and that was exactly the case here. He had redesigned, rebuilt, and reclaimed his WWE Championship, until again, in the most poetic fashion, Dean Ambrose cashed in the Money in the Bank on the same dude who ended the group he loved so much. And all three members of the Shield were WWE Champion in the same night. Honestly, looking back at it now, it's crazy how well WWE did with Rollins. They had so many subtle little hints for the audience to pick up on, and I really commend them for that. It was mid-summer 2016, we had the draft, and the first overall pick headed to Monday Night Raw was none other than Seth Rollins. We had an underwhelming Shield triple threat at Battleground, but Raw was left without a champion when the World Championship was taken to SmackDown by Dean Ambrose. And at SummerSlam, it was going to be the crowning of the first ever Universal Champion. Two of the best wrestlers in the world would put it on the line for the title. Seth Rollins against Finn Balor, but Rollins ended up losing. But the real loss came for Finn Balor. During the match, Rollins powerbombed Finn into the barricade, and due to injury, Finn Balor had to give up the Universal Championship the very next night on Raw. And the next week, we got our answer. KO, Big Cass, Roman Reigns, and Seth Rollins in an amazing fatal 4-way match, and the last two left in the final were KO and Seth Rollins. Triple H had put an end to the threat of Roman Reigns, and out he came to help Seth Rollins. And just when you thought Triple H was about to help Rollins finish the job, he turns towards Rollins and he hit a pedigree on his chosen one. Just like that, Triple H had destroyed what he created. He was the cerebral assassin, and we were left with so many questions. Throughout the fall and winter of 2016, Rollins was in pursuit of Triple H. At the same time, he had amazing matches too. The 5-on-5 match at Survivor Series was amazing, and the Hell in a Cell match with Kevin Owens is an underrated banger. But he wanted to get his hands on one man, that being Triple H. And Triple H wasn't backing down. He'd hold Rollins out of the Royal Rumble, and this man went on a hunt to NXT to find Triple H. He knew he was there, his knee was still hurting from the injury a year previous, but that didn't matter. The stage was set. It was the student versus the teacher. The one who was handpicked by Triple H for success against the man who just wanted to teach his student a little bit of a lesson. For a dude of Triple H's age, this was a great match. They went for about 25 minutes, and fittingly enough, Seth Rollins finished off the match with a pedigree and another career-defining win. Babyface Rollins was in full swing, but what did he want now? He wanted forgiveness. He wanted Dean Ambrose back as his brother. He wanted to be the Raw Tag Team Champions. And slowly but surely, Ambrose warmed up to Rollins again. The same guy who took that chair and stuck it in his back was asking for forgiveness. He was a changed man, and Ambrose was nothing but forgiving. At SummerSlam 2017, they did it. They were the new Raw Tag Team Champions. An underrated match with the Bar and two halves of the Shield were back together. The only missing piece was Roman Reigns. But it wouldn't be long before we had him in the mix too. All three of them were now reunited. 3 years later, they had all captured the WWE Championship, and it was time for a revenge tour. We saw an amazing match between the Shield and the New Day before Ambrose was written off with an injury. In late 2017, Rollins and Ambrose dropped the tag team titles to the Bar, but Rollins would get revenge, this time with Jason Jordan, who was being pushed so heavily. The two eventually lost the titles and went their separate ways. Rollins' Burn It Down was loved by the crowd, Every time he'd come out, the crowd would yell it at the top of their lungs. I remember one match in early 2018 where Rollins was involved in a 7-man gauntlet match, which took up, I'm pretty sure, more than half of Raw. Rollins was the MVP of that match, going quite far before eventually being eliminated. He had the audience's respect. Everyone loved his in-ring ability. After failing to become the #1 contender for Brock Lesnar, Rollins moved his sights to The Miz and his Intercontinental Championship. WrestleMania 34 was on its way and Rollins had his eyes set on gold. And in the opener, Finn Balor, The Miz, and Seth Rollins himself put on one of the best WrestleMania openers ever. Now Rollins was the Intercontinental Champion. The fans loved him. He had gone from the guy who everyone hated and slowly arced towards the guy everyone loved because of his in-ring skill and honestly, his theme song. He was helping carry Raw as Brock Lesnar was the Universal Champion, but of course, he didn't show up much. So during this time, the IC title started to feel as big as the World Championship. He gave us some amazing matches with Dolph Ziggler at Extreme Rules and SummerSlam before once again getting the band back together. Roman Reigns had won the Universal Championship off Brock Lesnar, and the Shield reunion was given one more try. In my opinion, it was too quick, and while it felt cool, it felt pretty forced. But it met another horrible end. Roman Reigns announced his leukemia was back. He vacated the Universal Championship, and on that same night, Ambrose and Rollins won the tag team titles, only for Ambrose to turn his back on Rollins. He wanted payback for what had happened years previous, and he wanted Rollins' Intercontinental Championship. Rollins went on to lose the Intercontinental Championship, and then came probably Rollins' best and worst year, 2019. There is a lot to get into with this year. Seth Rollins entered the Royal Rumble, and in the end, it was himself and Braun Strowman left. A stomp on the apron and Seth Rollins had punched his ticket to WrestleMania 35. The two champions at the time were Daniel Bryan and Brock Lesnar. Sure, Bryan was cool, but the better story was the underdog versus the conqueror, and we got just that. Seth had slayed a king, and now he wanted to slay the beast. It was during this time that Roman Reigns announced that he was in remission and back in the WWE. And at this time, we got one final Shield reunion. Seth and Roman got Dean to bite, and they had their final farewell as Dean Ambrose was leaving the company. Keep in mind that this is the guy who Seth Rollins had fought for years and years, traveled the road with, and he was now leaving the company. One of his best friends ever in the business. Keep that in mind. We'll get back to that in a second. At WrestleMania, the opening match was Seth Rollins versus Brock Lesnar for the Universal Championship. It was quick, it was exciting, and Rollins did everything he could to topple the beast, including resorting to low blows. Seth had captured the Universal Championship, and now Raw finally had a full-time champ. Everyone was in love with Rollins at this time, his in-ring ability, but what was more amazing was he was now 7 years into his main roster career, and he had proven that he could play any character, and he garnered so much respect during this time. It was during this Universal Championship reign which ruined Rollins for a period of time. After such a hot start, he had an amazing match with AJ Styles at Money in the Bank 2019, and from there he had a pretty uninspiring feud with Baron Corbin, who is not the person you want to be fighting when trying to put together a solid reign. It was at the same time where Seth Rollins' mouth got himself into a lot of trouble. As someone who is one of the faces of WWE, it was so important for him to be a good role model to people, but he really screwed up right there. After Dean Ambrose left WWE, Rollins made some unnecessary comments, saying how Ambrose was ungrateful to the company who gave him everything. He said that WWE would knock AEW dead. He said AEW was trying to take WWE's spotlight, and he even got into an argument with Will Ospreay, belittling Ospreay's talent and flexing his money. He sent out a tweet saying that his bank account was way bigger than Will Ospreay's, and this couldn't have come at a worse time. After he had so much fanfare headed into WrestleMania, he squandered all of it with his horrible activity outside of wrestling. And he was made to look like a further geek when WWE repeatedly kept telling us that Rollins and Becky Lynch were dating. He went from this guy who had an amazing aura to him to the dorky wannabe cool guy. At Extreme Rules 2019, Brock Lesnar cashed in the Money in the Bank to win the Universal Championship once again. Rollins would win it back a month later at SummerSlam. This was pretty pointless if you ask me, because fanfare towards Rollins was very low. Everyone was following the outside politics and knew what he was saying. One of the top guys in the company was behaving like a complete fool. During his second reign with the Universal Championship, he won the tag team titles with Braun Strowman while holding the Universal Championship at the same time. Eventually, they'd lose them pretty quick and Rollins would have a successful defense against Braun Strowman too. And then came Hell in a Cell 2019. Bray Wyatt had reinvented his character into the Fiend Bray Wyatt, a supernatural character with split personalities. The fans were loving this. Did he have any reason to be in a title match? Probably not. But after Seth Rollins lost all his momentum, having him feud with Bray Wyatt wasn't the right call. He burned down the Firefly Funhouse, and then the match at Hell in a Cell came. First of all, having red lights during a match, not very smart. Secondly, not knowing your own rules is a complete joke. Do you know that Hell in a Cell is a match where anything is legal? It's a no DQ match inside a steel enclosure. But this match ended in a DQ. After Rollins buried the Fiend, he hit him with a sledgehammer and the match was called off. WWE booked themselves into a corner with this match and had no idea what to do. They were putting so much stock into Rollins, but at the same time, they couldn't have him lose. But also at the same time, Bray Wyatt had just debuted this supernatural character immune to pain, so you couldn't have him lose either. So it ended in a DQ. The fans were livid. They were chanting restart the match, AEW, they were chanting for refunds. It's one of the most poorly received matches in WWE history. Rollins' reactions only got worse until he eventually dropped the title to the Fiend at Crown Jewel. And now Seth Rollins had messed up his own fortune so much that there was no choice but to change his character. It was at the beginning of 2020 where Seth Rollins turned heel, aligning himself with Buddy Murphy and the AOP. The Monday Night Messiah was born, a self-absorbed, all-knowing heel who tactically defeated his opponents. They basically played into what he was doing outside the ring, showing that he was above everyone else. He'd win the tag team titles with Buddy Murphy before eventually losing them to the Street Profits, but unfortunately the pandemic hit during this time, and we didn't get to see his character play out in front of fans. The pandemic era saw him feud with guys like Cesaro, Kevin Owens, and for the longest time, the Mysterios. He also gave us small glimpses into the future, hinting at a potential match with Roman Reigns. And at Money in the Bank, he did it. He did the thing. In the middle of the Universal Championship match between Edge and Roman Reigns, he attacked Edge. And by the looks of it, it's happening. It's finally happening. Edge versus Seth Rollins, one of my biggest dream matches ever, will be coming to us at SummerSlam 2021. After Rollins threatened to paralyze Edge in 2014, it's finally time for us to see what comes next. And I hope this feud is personal, as vicious, as physical, and as amazing as these two can possibly make it. On a personal note, these two are two of my all-time favorites, and I hope they tear strips off each other. There are some subtle little hints of Seth Rollins versus Roman Reigns in there too, and you already know when that match comes, it's gonna be long-term storytelling at its finest, and the match, as always, is gonna be amazing. But man, what a career Seth Rollins has had up to this point. We can bash WWE a lot for not building stars, but looking at it, they've done a great job with Rollins. They had him break up one of the most beloved groups in history, then he established his character for a little bit, won Money in the Bank, proved he could hang in the ring, and when we least expected it, he cashed in the Money in the Bank, and he gave us one of the greatest cash-ins ever. From here, he had a pretty solid title run, and when he returned, he was in top tier feuds. Sprinkled in all of this were small little callbacks to the past. We saw him evolve his character, we got to see some of the best matches in recent years from him, and consistently, he has proven that he's one of the best in-ring competitors in the entire world. His mouth got him into a lot of trouble in 2019, and honestly, that really bugs me because I really think he was on the cusp of something huge, and he squandered all of it. In 2022, Rollins will have been on the WWE main roster for 10 years. And we've seen him accomplish a lot. He's part of some of the biggest moments, matches, and storylines in recent years. But honestly, going forward, I think the sky's the limit. Once the Messiah character has played its course, I see Rollins trending upwards once again. He screwed it up for himself in 2019, but it wouldn't be a Seth Rollins story without rebuilding, redesigning, and reclaiming.